Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the No Name Cinema Society, episode 11. And it's a very special episode in the sense that today we're starting a new format. You know, those of you that watched the previous 10 episodes know that in the past we've talked about a current movie, an indie spotlight, and then a classic, usually in that order. And we're going to do the same thing tonight, but we're making 3 separate broadcasts. So for the next hour, we're just going to do talk about Tomorrowland. So I hope you guys had a happy Memorial Day weekend. I want to welcome my crew in. Davie Joe, are you still are you on fire there in Detroit?
No, man, everything's cool here.
So this is our buddy Drunk Davie, and now we turn to our buddy J Money. J Money, we are now 3.5 miles away from each other.
We're so close, and yet we're so far apart, Jamie.
Always, always. And we've special just perfect time for this special guest. 1 minute into the broadcast. This is the person I'm staying with, Mike Phillips. He was a part of our most recent classic movie screening, so he might come into play, you know, for the classic movie after 10 tonight. So, and it's also, I think, tonight's movie, Tomorrowland, deals a lot with dreamers. And so I think it's appropriate in a way that we actually have this conversation on the day of Sally Ride's 64th birthday. It seems apropos to talk about this movie at that time. To sum up Tomorrowland, well, first thing before I do that is some errors and omissions from last week. And I'm going to say 2 words, and I hope I didn't have to look this up. It came to me after the broadcast in my sleep last night. I woke up, not last night, but the night of the last week's broadcast. I woke up, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot it. George Bailey. Does that mean anything to you guys?
Yeah, what about George Bailey?
That was the name of the Jimmy Stewart character in It's a Wonderful Life that we could not remember for the life of us. George.
How do we blank on that? That's like, you know, one of the most basic things.
I was literally like in bed sleeping, and I woke up and I screamed George Bailey. I never even bothered looking up. One thing I did look up is I wanted to make sure I got the director of Road Games, whose name I couldn't remember last week. We had our Australian filmmakers discussion, and his name is Richard Franklin. And Road Games, again, it didn't make any of our lists. I think I'm the only one who's seen it. But I especially think Davie Joe would like it. It's a great double feature with last week's indie, The Guest. They're very similar in tone. And Richard Franklin is indeed an Australian filmmaker. That was the other thing I wasn't sure about. So Road Games is sort of like a cult recommendation that I want to make for you guys. Now, on to the matter at hand, which is Tomorrowland. So Tomorrowland is Disney's new film. In it, a cute whiz kid gets recruited to be a part of a different society in another dimension, where invention, imagination, and experimentation are all encouraged. In this place called Tomorrowland. But as she comes to find out that Tomorrowland and the future represents are not all it's cracked up to be. So I think it's time for some opening thoughts. J Money, why don't you go first?
Sure. Well, in the spirit of keeping it quick, I thought it was a weird movie, interesting, and also a little rough around the edges.
Davie Joe. Davie Joe?
I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. I really did enjoy it.
And I'm pleasantly surprised by your ability to be part of this conversation. Are you comatose out there? What's going on?
No, I answered you, man. You just didn't hear me. We'll play it back.
Well, what we're going to play back is you're going to see yourself, like, you know, 10 seconds after you actually answer my question. My opening thought is I think it's actually appropriate of the top 5 that we chose today, the Disney live-action films, because I think this film fits in nicely with the list of Disney's live-action films in their history, in the sense that it features, you know, kids in peril or danger, you know, or in larger-than-life situations, special kids, courageous kids, and you know, it features spectacle and a message, but still lacking the story and performance sophistication from some other films of each of the eras. So, I mean, I think that's true of a lot of the lists, and we'll get to that when we get to our top 5. And I think it's interesting, too, real quick, I just want to say that I think it also it has similar flaws to last week's classic in the sense that it didn't put as much emphasis on the lower levels of that cake. Remember my cake analogy from previous weeks?
Yeah.
So there is less emphasis on that, and also little tease here. It also has a similar flaw to our classic next week in its veering towards over didacticism, and that's something maybe we can get into right now. Now I'm going to start off the conversation by adding a new word to our repertoire, and this is more for Davy Joe. This
already did, by the way.
What's that?
You already did.
Didacticism? Well, I got another one for you.
Okay.
All right. Jay Money, you want to tell him how to pronounce that?
I can't see it, so you're going to have to tell me.
Oh, really? You didn't see that at all?
Well, it's kind of a blur for me, if you recall.
Oh, right. It's mise en scène.
Ah, mise en scène. Okay.
So, Jay Money, define it for Drunk Davie.
No, I'm going to let you define that one. I mean, come on. I mean, JP, as somebody in the industry, I want you to actually be the one that sets the taxonomy for what we're discussing here in general.
I'm going to describe it. My coloring just changed based on, I think by putting up that sign, my white balance went haywire.
It's only seems a little redder.
But anyway, you like the warm feeling?
Yeah.
Basically, the way it was just my British film history teacher described it to us early on is it's the shit on the screen. And I mean that's a sort of a very simplistic, broad description. But there's a couple. But for nothing else, this movie had a lot of ideas, and there was a lot going on in it. And they used every inch of that frame, and many times utilizing Disney history and also science history. Like, for example, do you guys remember the last name of the Britt Robertson character?
Oh, geez. It's Casey. I can't remember. Does it start with an L?
Nope. Just for time reason, I'm going to tell you it's Casey Newton. And do you remember what she throws at her father?
Right. She throws an apple. No, that occurred to me while I was watching it, too, that it was... I mean, I guess from my point of view, that kind of stuff felt a little heavy-handed. But sure, I get it.
Well, I mean, yes and no, and I'm going to make one more example, and then I'll mostly agree with you. The other thing, the other moment is the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland appearing at the World's Fair right before the moment when Frank Walker is about to ostensibly go down the rabbit hole.
Oh, I missed that, but that's pretty good.
And there's lots of little Disney references, lots of science references. Some are very references to Tesla and Einstein are very, very in your face. And Edison and things like that. Other ones are sort of spread throughout there. And my point about this is, yes, it was heavy-handed. I would rather a movie make tons of choices and make wrong choices than not make choices at all. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess for me, the question really comes down to who was the audience that we're trying to communicate this to. Because on one hand, I don't necessarily have a problem with the sense it was heavy-handed. I don't necessarily have a problem with the sense that, there was a lot of really unnatural sort of dialogue. There was a lot of things that were really preachy. There was definitely a specific tone of voice here that I think a more older and cynical audience might describe as naive, but for a younger audience seems incredibly appropriate, and also something I totally agree with. It's just that, given that tone, it felt at odds with other aspects of the movie that I think felt not kind of in sync with that idea.
Like, for example?
Well, I think that the most startling thing for me, and I don't want to sound too prudish about this, and it's funny because we're going to talk about this point later on when we get to our top fives, because it's actually something that's very dear to me, is there was a lot of disturbing violence in this movie that I was a little put off by, I suppose. I mean, it's a very bloodless movie, but then there's also some really kind of surprisingly violent scenes that happen that for me, I guess I felt like there was a cynical tone to that stuff. There was a cynical, overtext to that kind of stuff that seemed at odds with talking to, I think, 5 to 9-year-olds. I mean, to me, this movie was made for that sort of target audience.
David
Joe, what do you think about that particular idea?
Well, I noticed it also, but I was okay. I mean, look at basically people get hit with a laser and they kind of disappear. But But there definitely, I mean, there were people getting killed. I mean,
even beyond the laser thing, which to me was kind of out of the blue and also disturbing. I mean, honestly, for me, it just called to mind Minority Report, which, I mean, there's a lot of Spielbergian sort of references in this movie, but that was one for me that I thought was odd. There were also scenes that were, I don't want to give too much away, but a kid is hit flat on by a truck. There's a person whose face is literally deformed on camera.
In fairness, that's a different kind of kid, and I think.
But you don't know that at the time, and also I think that it's the point is that you're still seeing the action unfold as it happens. But I still think it's kind of a disturbing image one way or the other.
I think
what I would say is that I feel like there were a lot of parts of this movie that were actually very adult and very sophisticated, and the message at the core of this movie was incredibly not. It was incredibly naive and simple. And I don't have a problem with either aspect, but putting them together is where I felt a little bit disjointed.
I agree with everything Lass said. I mean, like, you're wrong, just like very wrong about not knowing that at the time the character was hit what the deal with that character was, because you find out just before that.
Didn't exactly know.
I guarantee you. David Joe, back me up.
I think you're right.
I think regardless of the fact that whether or not you wanted to make any kind of assumptions about the character, still seeing it happen is something that's
tell you. I mean,
one way or the other. I mean, there's also there's other things that happen.
I mean, certainly as an audience member, I knew that there was no real threat or danger.
Well, there was absolutely no blood in this movie. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like this is a violent movie. All I'm saying is that I think that there was enough disturbing imagery in it that I would kind of question how it matched up with the rest of the feeling of this movie, which is this sort of unbridled hope. It was a really weird dichotomy for me.
I completely agree with you on the tone issue. I feel like that is, I think that's what you're driving at, is that it feels at once for two different audiences. I don't know if I would have put it in that way, but now that you've sort of spelled it out, I think that is accurate.
I mean, I don't want to harp on the violence thing, because honestly, it's partly because I guess I'm an older dude now, and it's kind of I'm going to notice more. I don't know if kids would really be that bothered by it, frankly. And
that was the other point I was going to make, is I wondered if they were thinking that modern kids are more desensitized to this sort of thing, because I wondered that they are. I mean, I watched at a screening that we're going to talk about in like a month from now. I had kids at my first ever classic movie screening, and an 11-year-old thought it was hilarious about all the dying in the movie. It's like, oh, it's funny how they all got shot down. Like it was strange how unaffected they were, and that was sort of a lesson to me, because that was something I was worried about in showing the movie. But
well, let me ask you this: who do you think was the actual, really intended audience for this? Like, if you put an age group on it, who do you?
I would say the tweeners, probably.
Yeah.
And so that a couple different directions we can go in from here. Number one, I want to go in is the bottom of that cake, the story layer, which I was on board with this movie, and it leads to your message. I think it's ultimately about this message of this movie, which ultimately, I guess the first thing I'll say is, would you agree that it gets really heavy-handed?
Yeah. Oh, incredibly heavy-handed. But I guess again, I feel like that's appropriate for a younger audience that's maybe embracing this idea for the first time.
And yet, there's such negativity within that heavy-handedness that doesn't necessarily suggest the ultimate message is this hope idea. That I don't necessarily feel that is. I mean, if hope is a futuristic dimension that doesn't exist, then that's not that's not real hope. That's not substantial to build a movie around. But my issue sort of is close to that. I mean, that's a big issue. I mean, before we get on, David Joe, do you have anything on that?
Well, I think I do, because I think the driving theme of the movie is how it's not that there is no hope, but it's that the people who are hopeful and the people who have ideas and want to make things better are often marginalized and not given the time of day. And this movie kind of champions them.
I think that's a minor message. I think that's a minor message in the movie. I'm compared to this other idea that this environmental idea and these other ideas that. I mean, I think that ultimately there's a condemnation of mass media at the heart of this. Would you say that that's the case, J Money?
Yeah, well, sort of. I guess what I would say is that they are definitely pointing to mass media as being the contributing factor to like humanity's loss of hope, for instance.
Yeah.
But still the main point of it is that hope ends up being like the panacea in this movie, right? It ends up being the sort of abstract concept that somehow, and this gets back to the narrative structure that I had kind of a problem with, somehow it actually fixes everything in the end, and it just seemed like in a sort of a, it didn't really have a focus, unfortunately, for me, which is why I have a hard time kind of embracing that as a big kind of overall broad concept. I mean, I think that they were blaming the media, but I don't think that they were saying the media is the cause, per se.
I got the impression that it was. Davy Joe, did you catch the third new word for you for the night?
Well, what's the third word?
You didn't hear panacea in there?
Oh, panacea, no, come on.
So here's my issue. I didn't have a narrative problem with the movie for sure. Like, something didn't feel right, but I wasn't sure until towards the end of the movie because so I've got a picture of Hugh Laurie up here, who is Governor Nix, who is, I think it's fair to say.
I mean, if you're talking about names, his name is Nix. Which
no, there's no question about. I mean, like, and again, that's sort of like, it's borderline, right? Like, it's all right. So they're using cultural references, but it's borderline heavy-handed. But anyway, he sends all these people out to ostensibly kill our heroes, and then he's sort of like quick to embrace him, and his ultimate like sinister plot is really not that sinister. And I am, I was on board with the plot of it until I just felt like it was a very empty in the third act there, because he didn't really have what feel like a strong motivation.
Yeah, JB, I totally agree with you. I guess I feel like I couldn't figure out in the end exactly what the villainous intent of him was, and I kept thinking like I had reached the conclusion, like I had figured out his character. And then I don't know if it was Hugh Laurie or Brad Bird that was directing him, but he kept turning corners in ways that I wouldn't expect. Like, they actually gave him a fair amount of dimensionality, they gave him a fair amount of humanity, and I couldn't really figure out, was he the one that was really kind of the architect behind the problem, or was he just somebody that was taking on the problem? I think that's a problem. That idea, and my difficulty with this is probably because I think the narrative in general had a lot of loopholes in it. I think it had a lot of holes in kind of backstory that they never really explained.
I think that, and that's why I was on board with it at first, but it didn't tie up the way, like in any satisfying way. I mean, I love it when a villain has really justifiable motives. Like, I love that concept because it adds for moral ambiguity.
Right.
But in this particular case, he had potentially justifiable motives, but then why? I don't understand what the killing attacking was about. They don't seem to match.
Right.
Davy Joe, your thoughts on that?
I think I don't think he was as like, I don't want to give too much away, but I don't think he was necessarily trying to hurt the Earth. I think he was basically trying to preserve his area.
Well,
I'm talking specifically about how he sent these minions to go get our heroes, some of which would be seriously injured if they were.
Also, but at the end of it, he actually does have this speech that is pretty much in the same vein of another movie we saw recently, The Avengers. I mean, they kind of shared a similar, overall kind of story there in terms of what they were shooting for with the world.
We're going to bring that speech up again at the when we talk about our next classic. Just to put that back of your minds.
Yeah.
So a little tease. The other thing I wanted to, I'm going to move on to another qualm.
Okay.
If we could, I'm trying to keep things.
Keep it going. Keep it going.
Moving quickly here. I feel like this movie featured several poor performances and miscastings. Chief of which is our boy George Clooney, who I've never really, to be honest, I've never really admired as an actor with range. I feel like there's a film like Michael Clayton where he is perfect. He's the perfect role. Like an actor finds the perfect role that fits him like a glove, and that's a strong film. Here, first of all, if you do the math, from the movie, the age he was at the time he was at the World's Fair, he needs to be in his 60s at the time that you're looking at him right now. And George Clooney might actually be in his 60s, but I mean, I'm a director, he doesn't look like he's in his 60s.
Well, that's interesting, Jimmy, because I actually thought, because I did the math as well, and I thought, my God, is George Clooney actually like 65? And then I looked it up, and he's not. And I thought he actually looked older in this movie. I thought he actually looked kind of.
I think that was the effort, but I don't think he comes off as 60. Because the other thing is, he's supposed to be like, hear the script in the back of your mind, he's supposed to be very curmudgeonly, and not as active. Like, I more think like, like of Ed Asner and Up. Like Ed Asner. I know it's a cartoon, but like not that old necessarily, but certainly the curmudgeonly aspect of it, I think was the intention. And I think when George Clooney wanted to be a part of it, it was a name, and it got sidetracked, and they didn't change the role enough. It didn't feel, the role did not fit him to my mind here.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that to me there's a difference between him being a curmudgeon in this movie, like the guy like Ed Asner and Up, and him being kind of how he was. I think that Ed Asner was a guy that was at the end of a life that he lived and was seeing the changes around him, whereas Clooney was a character that never really had that opportunity. He was a guy that had a quick taste of utopia early on, and then had it taken away from him, and also honestly had some serious Arrested Development issues, which they kind of explore with other characters in this movie. Again, I don't want to give too much away.
That's true. I still think all those things would have been served with an older-looking actor. I'm not as old as Ed Asner per se, but certainly.
I don't know. I mean, would you have felt comfortable? I mean, there's some creepy aspects in this movie, which I don't think it's actually a problem. But I
don't feel any sexual tension between the boys.
There's definitely not. There isn't. But at the same time, you're still having to resolve that idea in your head, right? You have to resolve the idea of this kind of May-December romance almost in a way.
You're talking with the Athena character.
Yeah, I guess we should just jump into the other performances, because honestly, for me, Rafi Cassidy's performance was great. That was
going to be my exception. Before I got to her, I wanted to say how I also felt like Britt Robertson read a little too old.
How old was she? She was so ambiguous in this film. I could not figure it out.
Well, I mean, she was supposed to be a teenager, but she reads 25, and she is 25. So
she was a teenager that was like, she's a teenager that clearly had a license, and also was totally fine, like going away on her own to camp with friends. Like she was a teenager that fit anywhere between like 15 and what you're saying 25. It was weird. It was a weird place.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I don't think she's like awful, but she seems miscast. And she seems like she's too old for the role. She just felt too old for what the lines that were coming out of her mouth and things, the way it felt miscast. Here's Rafi Cassidy.
I agree. I guess for me, it's like I would have liked the actress to have been closer in age to, again, Rafi Cassidy, because I feel like that pairing would have made more sense.
I agree. I also think the May-December romance would have been a lot stronger if I don't think it would have been weird. I think it was actually handled delicately. It should have been an older guy. I think that reads better. It should have been a less good-looking guy. Yeah. To sort of, hammer home their connection. The less good-looking he is, the more it feels like a genuine soulmate connection, and that's related to a film I'm working on now, actually. So I've been making this argument for a while now. David Joe, how do you feel about Rafi Cassidy and Britt Robertson?
All right. Well, Robinson, I agree that she was miscast. It was a little odd. I couldn't get a read on her age and what she was supposed to be doing. But to get back to the Clooney, because I wrote down the exact opposite thing. I thought he was amazing in this movie. I thought he was great. I thought that the way that he pulled off the interaction with Rafi Cassidy and the nature of that relationship, that's a hard thing to do, and for me to be gripped by it the way I was, especially at the end, however that ended.
It's not a hard thing to do. It's not a hard thing to do.
I disagree with you. I disagree with you because getting back to what Jay Money said.
On what basis are you putting that knowledge? Like
because what I'm saying is that it's difficult for me to imagine an adult and a child having a relationship like that, and it's an odd relationship, like Jay Money was saying, for it to not to come off as just bizarre and off-putting.
That's the writing. That's writing. I think it's Rafi Cassidy, and I also think it's the flashbacks. George Clooney has nothing to do with it.
All right. Well, I mean,
I'm going to agree with David Joe on this one a little bit, honestly. But go on, David Joe.
You think George Clooney is good in this movie?
I do. I do.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I liked him. But I definitely like him more than you do. It sounds like, JB. Regardless, I mean, I agree that he's kind of a one-note actor in general. It just happens to be a note that works for me personally. Very well.
I think that I'm going to put this on the list of the stranger things that David Joe has said. I actually find it offensive that you like George Clooney in this movie, because I think he's pretty awful, and it's a real problem for me. But I mean, like, Brad Bird's to be talented guy, but he's to be blamed as well in the sense that George Clooney and Robertson never should have been in this movie.
So what exactly is your issue with him? Other than the fact that because so far you've basically said you wish he was an older character.
I mean that's part of it, but I also think he didn't pull off the role. Like he is not able to get a chameleon actor like a Robert De Niro type would have been even when Robert De Niro was the proper even George Clooney's age. Would have been able to get to that curmudgeonly place. Like George Clooney does not have the range.
I guess I disagree with your argument about it being more of a curmudgeonly character to begin with. I think that's really where we split on this. I don't necessarily agree that it should have been.
Well, I mean that it's my point of view. I'm about to wrap up. I have two nice things to say about the movie before we go. But do you guys have more?
I have one more thing to say about the whole movie in general, but go on with stuff as well.
No. I mean my stuff should wrap it up. So
okay. The other thing I want to say is that it's interesting because it occurred to me while I was watching this movie that Brad Bird is a director now that has a real bent, like a real sort of thematic thing he works with, and that's the idea of exceptionalism or elitism to some degree. It seems like a lot of his movies are taking the idea of there being very special people in the world, and they sort of deserve to have their own sort of private community to develop the best things to solve it. I mean,
to be clear, you think about 4 movies here, right? We're talking about Ratatouille, Incredibles, Ghost Protocol, and this. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Well, those are the 4 that come to mind for me, at least, especially. I mean, Ratatouille, that's a little bit weaker of a connection, but you could say that there's definitely an elitist attitude to the rat in that one, and the way that he has a special ability.
Yeah.
The Incredibles to me is a much more direct connection, just in the sense that it directly identifies people that are special and talks about how you can't have a special on a broad scale. You have to have people that are actually limited to their abilities. For this movie. It's the kind of thing where I don't necessarily have a problem with his idea. I just think it's interesting that he's embracing that as kind of a concept that's going across kind of all the stuff that's driving him. And I mean, it's a little off-putting to me. I mean, I was a little off-put by the basic idea of Tomorrowland. I was a little off-put by this idea of this sort of segregated utopia for certain special people.
It's a weird message, and like this is a movie. I mean, like then again, I think about. They had the theme park first and decided how to make a movie based on the idea of a theme park.
No, I know. Well,
I know that for a fact because he talks about the meeting that he had. Like, I've always thought it was a cool idea that you had a park named Tomorrowland. That might make a fun movie, and then came up with the idea from there.
Yeah.
And it seems like a backwards way to make a movie. So
it certainly fits with his MO. But what occurred to me while I was watching this was I was thinking like this is like the positive end version of another movie we watched earlier this year, Insurgent. It's like Insurgent has this community of intellectuals and whatever the thinkers who actually ends up being the bad guys in that movie. Whereas this is like the opposite end of the spectrum. Here's a community of people that are actually dreamers for tomorrow that are going to save the world ultimately.
Doesn't it make Insurgent look a little stronger?
I don't know about that. I think it's interesting that these are 2 distinct viewpoints that we're kind of up against in the same year, but they're also. I mean, I guess I would say Insurgent's a much more cynical approach, whereas this one's a much more blindly naive approach. There's got to be somewhere middle. There's got to be a middle ground here somewhere.
All right, so we don't have a lot of time left. Actually, the timer's about to go off, and now. So just 2 real quick things that I would like to point out. Some props to the craft elements of the film are very strong. I talked about the higher layers of the cake were extremely terrific, lots of spectacle. I want to particularly point out the production design by Scott Chambliss and the score by Michael Giacchino, his best work since Up. And I thought both of those guys did tremendous jobs. And I just wanted to acknowledge them before, and like Oscar-worthy jobs. And I just want to point out, I don't think it's a bad movie. I just think it's a flawed movie, and I just wanted to mention those guys before we moved along.
Totally on board.
Davey Joe?
Yeah, really quick. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said about Raffi Cassidy. She was, I think that she's definitely the strongest performance in the movie, and I look forward to seeing her in other stuff.
You're like 5 minutes late, but
We'll go quick. All
right, time to move on. Time for our top 5 connected to Tomorrowland. This is the top 5 Disney live-action films of all time. And I don't know about you guys, but based on our conversation earlier, it seems like you guys had a harder time making this. Usually, when I make these lists, I wind up with, I can easily find 5, and I have like 2 or 3 also-rans. This time around, I grew up with almost all these movies made before 1985, and and the nostalgia factor is heavy for sure. But I mean, I came up with it was actually the hardest list to come up with the top 5. I actually came up with 15 at first, and then had to whittle it down from there. Sounds like you guys had a harder time. Davy Joe, make that face again. But I also want to make the point. This film is not on my list, but I went to see it last at the El Capitan, Disney's own personal theater in Los Angeles, and it's not on my list, but it's a special movie. It's a movie I grew up with, and it just made me think of. And I like the movie. It'd be on a top 10 if we went that far. But I remember watching. There's a nostalgia factor with this list. I don't know if you guys feel it as well, but I remember in watching it in December with some friends in LA. I felt great watching it because it reminded me of watching it with my dad as a kid, and I just wonder if watching it with me reminded him of when he was a kid. And there's something about these movies, for all their flaws, and I think for the most part they're all flawed. We sort of indicated that in my opening remarks. They just don't have the sophistication of some of the other films, with one notable exception. There's something about these films that is somewhat magical.
Yeah, I agree. Although it's interesting because I think I approached my list in a different way, JB. It wasn't just movies that I think of nostalgically now, as much as movies that I definitely have seen as an adult and have actually still appreciated quite a lot as an adult. So
cool. Well, do you want to go first then? Number 5.
Sure. And actually, my number 5 really doesn't count in terms of nostalgia, but it was a movie that I'm using to round out my list. It's Pirates of the Caribbean: The Black Pearl, so the first one, which really is a movie that, for me personally, came out of nowhere. I went to it on a kind of a whim, and I was so delighted with the performance by Johnny Depp and what was happening in the movie in general that I just ended up really enjoying myself in the environment.
Yeah, I think it's a really strong film. Actually, no. Initially, I really enjoyed the film, and it didn't make my top 10 list of that year, but I had good things to say about it. In hindsight, I realized that, the movie is all about Johnny Depp's performance.
Yes,
and it lost the Oscar. It should have won the Oscar. I actually would have given him the Oscar, even though it's a comedy performance. It's such an iconic role that he created out of thin air. And that's something. Even though it looks like he's going to be arrested and put in jail for 10 years at this point. Do you guys hear about this?
Yeah.
No.
He brought dogs to Australia, and it looks like he's going to do jail time. It's a true story. Look it up. Dave, corroborate me.
No, I'm not doubting.
Yeah, he's looking at some serious time.
As Davy Joe makes more notes. The problem is the sequels, I think, damage the luster of the original.
No, I absolutely agree. The sequels are terrible. It's really the first one to me that has the kernel of anything. I guess in the sense, I'm nostalgic for that moment 10 years ago.
Even though it's only, 12 years ago, yeah. Davy Joe, you're number 5.
My Fair Lady.
My Fair Lady is not a Disney.
All right, fine.
Oh, damn.
I gave him a list of 229 films, ladies and gentlemen. 229 films. You are so fucking fired. This is ridiculous.
It's not on there?
My Fair Lady is not a Disney movie. It's a Broadway musical. Dear God, man.
It was on the list that I saw.
No.
I hope that the rest of Drunk Davie's picks are also brought up.
I hope they're all not on there.
Drunk Davie, move on. Oh, I've got to give my number 5 before we move on. I don't even want to, you're so on my list right now. I unfortunately have an awful photo for the movie that's my number 5, and this was my number. This actual movie I enjoyed so much. It made my top 5 list of 1989. Granted, I was 13 at the time. This is a movie called Cheetah, and it was not a movie I was looking forward to seeing. It's not a movie I wanted to see, but I just loved this movie. And I was 13, and I don't know how much it holds up, but a theme that I think we're gonna talk about a lot over the course of this top 5 is kids in peril, and in this case another Disney staple is animals in peril as well. It's sweet, it's smart, it's inspirational, moving, and exciting, and it's educational. It teaches a lot about Africa and the animals of Africa, and it's not as didactic as something like Tomorrowland in that regard, or even their nature documentaries. It was a surprise film, and I think it's a hidden gem amongst their canon. you didn't get much notice at the time. All right, I assume you guys have not seen it.
I haven't seen it. Yeah.
All right, Davey Joe, you're going to have to redeem yourself.
So I figured out what I did, and I'll explain it later. And you're right, it's not on the list. Old Yeller.
Old Yeller, number 4. Okay.
That counts.
That definitely counts, and it was on my top 10. I think I forget what number I had it at. Actually, it was number 11. But Old Yeller's no argument with Old Yeller. It's an iconic film. J Money, do you have any thoughts on Old Yeller?
Sure. It's well, I mean, I guess I never really liked it that much, just in general. But yeah, it's an iconic film, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and I can respect it from a distance.
And I mean, like, you can also, I mean, I think I'm not giving it away. Everybody knows the ending at this point. Kind of actually, it's similar ending to Cheetah in a way, except with the exception of it doesn't go as drastic as Cheetah, but letting go, the concept of letting go is strong in both films. So
I feel like there was a point in our lives where there were so many things that were like that. I mean, like I was maxed out from Where the Red Fern Grows. I don't think I could connect with Old Yeller as well.
And actually, I moved on so quick. I mean, like, you didn't actually justify your pick of Old Yeller. Was there?
Well, no, I think that it kind of it addresses a pretty it's a heavy movie for kids, and it pays it off, and in the also for a kids movie, I mean, it's a pretty serious arc that the main character goes through, and I think it's nice. It's just a nice movie.
And I mean, like, it's like the two of the actors from Old Yeller are also in Swiss Family Robinson. They recycled these actors, time and time again in a lot of these movies, especially in the 50s and 60s. All right, J Money, number 4.
Number 4, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Oh.
A classic from my childhood, a classic movie that I still actually respect, and obviously, JB, you must too, since you just screened it recently.
How did you know that?
No.
How did you know I screened it recently?
Mind tricks. I just, it's funny because it's funny. We're going to talk about these movies that feature kids in peril. This is a movie that definitely features kids in peril in very serious ways as well. Even though it's such a surrealistic movie, there's an authentic sense of danger in this movie, and I think that's one of the things that probably will show up again and again on all the lists that we're going to talk about. Certainly something that I realized putting this list together that drew me into all my picks one way or the other.
I mean, I think it was in rewatching it very recently. And I assume you haven't seen it. I saw it in late February, so I assume you haven't seen it since then.
Yeah, between February and now, definitely not now.
So you have a very fresh perspective on it. I was surprised, and I had a group, screening it with us it was the day before the Oscars, part of our Oscar movie marathon. The script is actually really smart, really tight.
Yeah, I remember that too. I remember the sense of I guess I felt like it was a very amusing. There was a lot of really amusing parts to it, but also it didn't really feel unnatural from what I remember.
No. I mean, once you bite the bullet, like the swallow the pill of disbelief, as I call it, then you're on for the ride. And it's a great performance by Matt Frewer in a supporting role, also known as Max Headroom, and also a great grounded performance by Marcia Strassman, who's sort of like the sane person in the insane world as the mother, who recently passed away, Marcia Strassman. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids did not make my top 5, but it did. I have it at number 7 because I'm a little older than you are, so it wasn't as connected with my childhood, I think. Davey Joe, as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, any thoughts?
Yeah, I remember it was one of the first VHS tapes that I had, and there's a Roger Rabbit for it, and it's awesome. That's really what I remember.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. That is pretty awesome.
Oh, the Roger Rabbit short, you mean?
Short, yeah.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to move on, and I don't know if you guys had heard of this movie before getting my list, but, I mean, talk about a movie I grew up with and, adored, and I haven't seen it in forever. It's called Escape to Witch Mountain.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to be these kids so bad, and I was in love with this girl played by Kim Richards, who's now a Real Housewife of Beverly Hills, and it's a true story, and she's even cuter in the sequel, by the way. These kids have telekinesis, and they're fascinating and really well drawn, based on a really good book as well. I think it's really strong. Buddy Ebner's in it as well as sort of like this adult that helps them, and Ray Milland is one of the villains in this one. In the sequel, Betty Davis and Christopher Lee are villains, and it's. Again, back to the kids in peril. I'm not gonna, but there's also a lot of joy and excitement in this film, and I wanted to be them. I wanted their powers. Have you guys? It looks like you guys have seen it actually.
Yep.
No.
You've not. I recommend them both. There was a Dwayne The Rock Johnson did a remake recently, Race to Witch Mountain, just in the last couple of years. But the original is, as a kid, it was pretty special. All right, David Joe, you get to do your number 3.
It's Pirates of the Caribbean, Black Pearl, Curse of the Black Pearl. The only thing that we didn't talk about, because I agreed with essentially everything that you guys said, the one thing that I'd point out about this movie is it sort of changed the lexicon. Everyone says more like guidelines now, and it's all because of this movie. Anyway, it's a great movie.
You mean what?
They're not really rules, they're more like guidelines.
Guideliner? You talking about guideline?
I've never heard that. J Money. J Money. We have to hurry up, guys. J Money, number 3.
All right, number 3 is I think it's from 1980, The Black Hole. It's a movie that it was a really big part of my childhood as well. It's a very creepy, authentically dark movie. It has its own version of Jar Jar Binks and this kind of floating robot. I don't know if either of you guys have seen it, but it's a surprisingly dark, twisted movie.
I had a feeling one of you guys was going to pick it. I didn't get a photo together for it, but it is. It's been a really long time. It didn't connect with me the way that some of these other films did. I'm not gonna lie, and I don't think it's a bad film. I think it is, a lot of these films are interchangeable in a lot of different ways. But that particular one, I think I was put off by Ernest Borgnine somehow.
That's fine. I saw it again back in October, and that's why it's here now, because it reminded me of all these things I felt about when I was a kid, and also I was impressed by a lot of things I still saw. But yeah, there's some performance issues. There's some performance problems with it, but other than that, there's a texture to it that I love so much.
It did hold up, huh?
It held up for me. I mean, I also connected with it as a kid in a way that was very spooky. It was the thing that drew me in, even though it scared me. And watching it now, it still kind of spooked me out a little bit. So there's a quality there that I really appreciate.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. David Joe, do you have thoughts on The Black Hole?
No, I've never seen it.
You've never seen The Black Hole? Well, what would you say is the percentage of movies you've seen on this list?
I mean, I think I've seen probably 8.
That's ridiculous. That's 229 films. Did you grow up in a dungeon, as J Money would say? I'm going with the obvious choice here at number 3, and I think I don't think I'm actually saying something bold here when I'm saying that it's probably the most well-known and most sophisticated of all 229 films. It's the only one of those films nominated for Best Picture. It's the only one to win an Oscar in any of the major categories, winning for, and I think deservedly winning Best Actress for Julie Andrews, who was the biggest star of the 60s, and Mary Poppins. It is, I think it's the most sophisticated, in-depth of all these films, but and it has probably the best songs of any of these live-action films, the best production value. But for whatever reason, it's not my number 1 because I don't have as much of the nostalgic connection with it. And it probably is one of the stronger messages. I am acknowledging that it's probably the best made of all these films, but it's not my favorite. So that's why it's at number 3 and not number 1. And for what it's worth, Davy Joe, Julie Andrews, Mary Poppins lost Best Picture to My Fair Lady. If you feel better about that.
That's what happened to me, by the way.
Oh, okay. So was Mary Poppins your number 5 then?
No.
Oh.
No. I messed it up in my head, and it's a little more complicated than that. I'll tell you later.
Okay. Right. So do either of you guys have Mary Poppins comments, or you want to save them?
I guess what I would say is that I think that I respect Mary Poppins. I think that's the kind of movie that it's fine. It's not the kind of thing that really connected with me as a kid. It doesn't really connect with me now, but I certainly can understand why it would fit on this list. And
Dave Joe, you've not seen it, I guess?
No, I have not.
That is.
Have you seriously not seen Mary Poppins, David Joe?
I don't want to do these lists anymore. I'm on record as saying that I don't want to play.
Mike has not seen it either. Mike, you're welcome to chime in.
All right.
We're live though, so watch your language. Watch your fucking language. All right, we have to keep moving. J Money, why don't you give your number 2?
All right, my number 2. You probably saw this coming. Is Tron, the original Tron, which again is a movie that I really connected with as a kid, in part because of the aesthetic, I think, and part because it was sort of a dark movie that I was trying to figure out. But also a movie that I have watched since it came out as an adult, and I watch still occasionally. I have the DVD and everything like that, and I really like it a lot. And a large part of that is because of the design of the movie. There's not a lot of great performances in the movie, and it's a relatively wooden sort of script. But I think that the design of it is so brilliant, and it's such a thing that I really wish Disney had reinvestigated when they had brought back the franchise. I feel like they really missed the mark in the new version. But that's just a personal opinion, obviously. So number 2 is Tron because I still take a lot from it just in terms of visual style.
I agree with all that you said. I didn't make my list though for the reasons that the exact reasons that was your qualifier. So,
Sure.
It's just how much we weigh into the design, like how much that factors in. And yeah, I mean, and less of an emotional connection. David Joe, do you want to save your Tron comment, or do you want to? You haven't seen Tron.
No, I've not seen Tron, right?
Who is this guy on this show with us? This is crazy. David Joe, give us your number 2.
Remember the Titans?
All right.
I should have known that was coming, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, it's a movie about it tackles race in I think a way that is lighthearted, but it's based on a true story, and I don't know. I enjoy the film, and I also think that the football in the movie looks really good. And I think it's football generally in movies doesn't look really good. Other movies that I can think of don't stack up. I think Remember the Titans does it very well.
Do you want to comment, J Money, or do you want to wait?
I mean, it's a football movie. If you can't tell what I've already picked, I'm kind of more into arty, darky, gothy movies, so not really in my aesthetic.
Yeah, I wasn't. The film's a little too much for me. Like a little. Again, I use the word didactic because I'm trying to get David Joe to learn the word. But I'm gonna move on to my number. What's that?
I'm fighting you on that.
Yeah, apparently. I'm going with nostalgia again. Kids in Peril for my number 2. Flight of the Navigator, everybody. And Flight of the Navigator came up on our War Games episode of Film Revision that I did with Drunk Davie over there. And because we did a War Games, and quite frankly, Escape from Witch Mountain was the original Kids in Peril thing, I think. Especially that subgenre that led into War Games. And one of the movies we talked about last week, Daryl, also, part of this subgenre. Flight of the Navigator is. I grew up with this movie. I still feel like it's fun, positive, a really good adventure. Has a really young Sarah Jessica Parker, and has Paul Rubens as the voice of that little robot up there in the corner of that picture. And a really good cast: Cliff DeYoung, Veronica Cartwright, and Howard Hessman is the villain. At one point, I remember very specifically Sarah Jessica Parker spikes the lens, and that always threw me off. But I mean, I watched this movie over and over again, along with Daryl and Cloak and Dagger. And I actually think it's not as strong as Daryl, but stronger than Cloak and Dagger. David Joe, tell me you've seen Flight of the Navigator at least.
I've seen Flight of the Navigator.
And do you want to comment on it, or you want to wait?
Oh no, you told me to tell you that. No, I haven't seen it.
Oh.
Breakdown.
You were nodding, I saw, J Money, when I brought up the photo.
Yeah, Flight of the Navigator is a movie I saw repeatedly when I was a child, and honestly, it's the kind of thing where I didn't include it on this list, or other ones we've talked about, like Escape and Return to Witch Mountain, which are also movies that I watched a lot of as a kid, just because I haven't seen them in the last 10 years, and I was really trying to look for things that I still connect with right now that I know for sure I connect with. But yeah. I loved Flight of the Navigator as a kid.
I mean, I can't divorce myself from this nostalgic reaction. I mean, I admit that it's a bit of an E.T. derivative, but it's still really powerful, very fun, and very detailed. It's a lot stronger, I think, than both War Games and Cloak and Dagger.
Yeah, which are other movies I definitely watched a lot of when I was a kid as well, by the way.
Yeah. All right, so we have to hurry. Yeah, we better hurry quickly with our number ones. Let's get Davy Joe's over with.
Secretariat.
Okay.
I actually haven't seen Secretariat.
You, man. What's wrong?
I'm not embarrassed by that. J Money, have you seen Secretariat?
Nope, sorry, I haven't either. Sorry.
You have 30 seconds to defend yourself.
No, I don't care. Just go.
Well, why was it a good movie? Give me something.
The horse wins. I don't know, man. I've seen 8 of these things. I gotta pick 5. And one of them wasn't even on the list.
Do you understand how pathetic it is? First of all, this is a cinema review show. Secondly, this is like one of the broadest categories that we've had.
Well, I understand. I know, but I didn't see them. What do you want out of me? It's a good movie. See it. You'll like it.
I don't think I will.
It's just that Davie Joe plays the horses, so I can understand why this would make sense.
I do.
I know he do.
All right. Well,
It makes a lot of sense.
J Money, give us your number one and save us from this.
Number one is I believe from 1983 or 1984. It's called Never Cry Wolf. It's a movie that I think a lot of people haven't really necessarily seen or even heard of. It's a movie that I still watch on a regular basis because I think it's an absolutely beautiful film, and also it's a movie that's very much about quietness and solitude and about sort of this. I don't know. It's a very pensive and also kind of it's just kind of a movie that centers yourself in a way because it's centered around this one narrative. There's one lone guy in the wilderness. He's interacting with wolves. Brian Dennehy's in it. He's kind of fun. There's a lot of things to it that I really like.
If he's not, I haven't seen it in a long time. I don't have a lot to say about it. It is sort of unique in the canon, though, especially tonally speaking.
It's very tonally unique. It's also probably the only Disney movie here that'll feature full frontal male nudity, which it does, by the way, oddly.
Yeah, interesting choice. I didn't connect with it as much, and nothing wrong with it. But I mean, like it's a slower movie. It's slower pace and
It's a slower movie, and also I grew up in the north in very wintry lands, so I think from that point of view, I also connected with it on that level. And there's something about it that I still think is very nostalgic for me.
And I'm a little disappointed in myself as I segue to my number one. I assume, Davie Joe, by the way, that you have not seen Never Cry Wolf.
Oh, correct.
I'm surprised you haven't seen this one, though. And I'm disappointed myself that I'm going so recent, but I think it's an outstanding film. 2004's Miracle is my number one. And, Miracle on Ice was exciting enough as it is, and I just thought it was Gavin O'Connor, who directed Warrior as well. I assume Davie Joe has at least seen Warrior. Balances the Herb Banks story with the rest of the team. It's extremely satisfying, very exciting, and I mean, I feel like it's closer to Hoosiers than it is the Mighty Ducks as far as the sports movies are concerned. I also feel like Kurt Russell himself gives the performance of a lifetime, and because it's not just an impersonation of Herb Brooks, it's a complete and thorough portrayal. But also while nailing all the small the isms that made Herb Brooks who he was. I mean, like he got all that while remaining inspirational at the same time. And Kurt Russell, of course, is a long-time Disney guy. I mean, he was since a kid. So this is like a full circle for him. It's the performance of his career, and quite frankly, I don't think he's an actor with a lot of range. But in 2004, I would have handed him the Academy Award. I would have given him for the win for this film. He wasn't even nominated, but I think it's a tremendous performance in a movie that's somewhat overlooked but has a little bit of cult status. I assume Davie Joe has not seen it.
I have not.
Well, I'm honestly surprised, Davie Joe.
I'd like to see it. I would like to see it.
I think you would like it. Davie, you were shaking your head no, I think. We have 1 minute left, by the way.
Who? What? No, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
Hey, Money, you were shaking your head no.
Oh, I guess I was thinking like this is so outside my wheelhouse. I just don't know this movie at all, honestly.
I'm like I said, I tend to go older, but it's a movie that I just connected with, and it stands up really strong. They play his speech at the end. They play it in a lot of stadiums now. Like it gets fans riled up. It's really cool, including Citizens Bank Park. Davie Joe.
Sure. Is it your favorite hockey movie of all time?
That's a different category.
It's a different category. I mean, like it's hard to deny Slapshot, but maybe Miracle.
I'm going Slapshot, man.
Go Slapshot. Yeah.
But I haven't seen yours, so I can't.
Yeah. I mean, there's that's a tough one because they're different sides of hockey for sure. All right. Guys, I think it's time for us to move on, to close up and start the new broadcast.
Excellent. So
we're going to end this Tomorrowland and Top 5 broadcast. And in about 5 to 6 minutes, we are going to start anew with our Indie Spotlight. And there's the timer, so we just on time. There you go. So we will. So tune in just like 5 minutes, and we'll start the Indie Spotlight. And I think little hint here: Tomorrowland could be the title of the Indie Spotlight if they wanted to take that title very, very literally.
That's true.
Wow.
So that's my segue, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. We'll see you in about 5 minutes. For those of you that just like the current movies, the next one we're going to review is Spy in about 2 weeks, June the 8th. I'll talk to you guys about that later. But most importantly, right now, Indie Spotlight at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific, in about 5 minutes. See you shortly.